Tonight's story comes from a man who reached out to us with an experience that changed his life in ways he never expected. Our guest is Daniel Mercer, a 35-year-old risk analyst from London. Daniel has lived a life built on logic, careful planning, and rational decisions. Yet even he admits that nothing could have prepared him for what happened during his time in Thailand. He told us that he wanted his story shared exactly as it happened, without exaggeration, because someone else out there might be walking toward the same kind of danger without realizing it. His words were quiet when he said it, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. This isn't a tale of adventure or romance. It's a warning shaped by real events. So now, we will take you through Daniel's experience from the beginning. How a simple search for change led him into the orbit of a Thai woman named Nisha, and how the trust he placed in her would cost him more than he ever imagined. What you are about to hear is told exactly as he lived it, piece by piece, moment by moment. Daniel Mercer had always imagined himself as the kind of man who stayed in control. His career demanded it. For more than a decade, he worked in risk analysis, calculating dangers, predicting outcomes, and identifying the smallest inconsistencies that could turn into disasters. Ironically, what unraveled him later had nothing to do with business. It was something far more unpredictable: his own heart. He arrived in Thailand at a time when he felt suffocated by his routine. Every morning in London felt identical. Same office, same commute, same conversations, and a loneliness he refused to admit even to himself. A colleague had once joked that Daniel lived more in spreadsheets than in the real world. Maybe that was true. So when he booked a 3-week trip to Thailand, he told himself it was just to clear his mind. No expectations, no plans beyond relaxing and trying to breathe again. His first days were exactly what he hoped for. Warm air that loosened the tension in his shoulders, markets filled with colours he didn't know he missed, and a pace of life so different from the cold efficiency of home. He wandered through Bangkok like someone slowly remembering what it meant to enjoy simple things: street food, night lights, music drifting from open bars. Everything felt new, everything felt alive. But the moment that changed everything came unexpectedly. He was sitting in a small cafe near the Chao Phraya River, resting from a long walk, when a voice next to him asked if the seat was taken. He looked up to see a woman with calm eyes, delicate features, and a smile that felt both welcoming and cautious at the same time. Her name was Nisha. She explained that she worked nearby and often came to the cafe after her shift. Her English was soft but clear, and her presence had a quiet warmth that immediately unsettled him in a way he could not explain. At first, their conversation was light. She asked why he had come to Thailand, how long he planned to stay, what he thought of the food. He answered awkwardly at first, then more comfortably, as he realized he hadn't spoken this openly to anyone in a long time. Nisha listened with a focus that made him feel strangely seen. When she laughed at one of his self-deprecating comments, he felt something loosen in him. They ended up talking until the sun started to set. When Daniel stood to leave, Nisha asked if he would be in the area again. He said he wasn't sure. She smiled gently and told him that if he ever wanted company or help exploring the city, she would be happy to show him around. It was such a simple offer, yet Daniel felt as if something had quietly shifted. He walked back to his hotel thinking it was just a pleasant encounter. Nothing more. But deep down, a part of him already knew that this was the beginning of something that would go far beyond a casual meeting. Something that would pull him in slowly, quietly, without him noticing the danger beneath the surface. Daniel woke the next morning with an unusual sense of anticipation. He had no appointments, no deadlines, no obligations that required him to monitor risk or analyze outcomes. Yet something inside him felt alert, as if he were standing at the edge of a path he had not meant to step onto. He tried to ignore the thought, telling himself that yesterday's conversation with Nisha had been nothing more than a brief, pleasant moment. But as he drank his coffee on the balcony of his hotel, watching the early boats glide across the river, he realized he was thinking about her more than he expected. Later that afternoon, he wandered through the same neighborhood where they had met. He told himself it was coincidence, that he simply enjoyed that part of the city. But when he passed the cafe and saw her sitting by the window looking down at her phone, something inside him shifted. Before he could reconsider, his feet were already carrying him toward the door. Her eyes lifted and a small, genuine smile appeared the moment she recognized him. "Daniel," she said softly, as if she had been expecting him. That one word, spoken with warmth, dissolved the last bit of hesitation he had. She invited him to join her again, and this time the conversation flowed even more naturally. She told him about her life growing up in a small town in the north before moving to Bangkok to work. Her parents were farmers, her younger brother still in school. She lived modestly, sharing an apartment with 2 friends, and worked long shifts at a shop nearby. There was a simplicity to the way she spoke, a sincerity that made Daniel feel strangely grounded. He found himself telling her things he hadn't said aloud in years. How he often felt disconnected from people, how his job demanded constant pressure, how he sometimes wondered if he had traded too much of his life for a career that rarely gave anything back emotionally. Nisha listened without judgment, her eyes focused, her expression gentle. It was the kind of attention he wasn't used to receiving. When she suggested showing him around the city the next day, Daniel felt a quiet thrill. He agreed without hesitation. The following days began to blend into something almost dreamlike. She took him to places guidebooks never mentioned, hidden temples where the air smelled of incense, small local markets where vendors greeted her like family, quiet alleys with murals painted in brilliant colors. At night they walked along the river, the lights shimmering on the water as she told him stories of her childhood. Daniel felt himself becoming lighter around her, as if he were shedding a weight he had carried for years. He laughed more, he slept better. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in a long time. Nisha never asked for anything, never pushed, never hinted at motives. Her calm presence made it easy to forget that he knew almost nothing about her beyond what she chose to share. One evening, as they sat outside a small rooftop bar overlooking the city, a soft breeze passing between them, Nisha turned to him and said, "I'm glad you came here, Daniel. You seem different this week. Happier." He looked at her, surprised at how true the words felt. He wanted to respond, to tell her how deeply she had already influenced his days, but he stopped himself. Instead, he said, "I feel like I can breathe here, and being with you, it feels natural." She smiled, but there was something unreadable in her eyes, something he couldn't quite name, a flicker of emotion that vanished before he could understand it. They stayed on that rooftop until the city lights blurred into the night. And when he walked back to his hotel, he realized he had crossed an invisible line. He wasn't just enjoying his time with her anymore, he was becoming attached, drawn into her world in a way that felt intoxicating. He convinced himself it was harmless, that he was simply enjoying his trip, making memories, letting himself live for once. What he didn't know was that this growing bond, this quiet closeness, was forming the very foundation of the storm that would soon take over his life. For the first time in years, Daniel woke up each morning with something to look forward to. Nisha's messages arrived early, always warm, always thoughtful, as if she had been awake for hours waiting to speak to him. He told himself it was nothing unusual, that people in Thailand simply communicated more affectionately. Still, the way she typed his name, the way she asked how he slept, the way she said she missed talking to him even if they had just spoken the night before, these things planted a quiet warmth inside his chest. But slowly, almost too quietly to notice, the air around their connection began to change. It started one afternoon when they were supposed to meet near a small riverside temple. Daniel arrived early, hoping to enjoy the scenery before she came. The minutes passed. 10, 20, 40. He sent a message, no response. He waited longer, convincing himself she might be caught in traffic. Finally, more than an hour later, She appeared with hurried steps and an apologetic expression. "I'm so sorry," she said, slightly out of breath. "My boss asked me to stay longer. I couldn't use my phone." Her explanation sounded reasonable, but something in her tone felt rehearsed, too polished. Daniel brushed off the discomfort, reminding himself that she owed him nothing. Still, the uneasy feeling lingered in the back of his mind. Over the next few days, similar moments began to appear, small cracks in the smooth image he had built around her. Once she excused herself to take a call and returned looking tense, saying only that it was family issues. Another time she claimed she had forgotten her wallet when they were buying drinks, though Daniel could clearly see a corner of it inside her purse when she reached for her phone. He ignored it, telling himself it was insignificant. The most unsettling moment came late one evening. They were sitting together near the river, watching boats wrapped in colourful lights drift across the water. It was peaceful, almost romantic. Nisha rested her head lightly on Daniel's shoulder, and for a moment he felt entirely at ease. But when a group of men passed nearby, speaking Thai, Daniel felt her stiffen. Her hand tightened around his arm, and she turned her face away as if she didn't want them to see her. He asked if everything was all right. She quickly forced a smile and nodded, saying she didn't understand what the men were saying. But the fear in her eyes told a different story. Later, when Daniel mentioned it again, she dismissed it with a soft laugh. "You worry too much," she said. "It was nothing." A part of him wanted to believe her. Another part of him, the part trained for years to detect inconsistencies, recognized that something was wrong. People didn't react like that without a reason. But by then he was already far too invested. He didn't want doubts. He didn't want to risk losing the connection that had made him feel alive again. So he smothered the concerns, pushed them deep down, and focused instead on the warmth she offered him when she smiled. As the days went by, the cracks grew wider, but Daniel refused to look closely. Every red flag was painted over with hope, every strange moment explained away by his longing to trust someone again. He didn't realize that the ground beneath him was already shifting, slowly but surely, preparing to collapse. Daniel woke before sunrise with a strange heaviness pressing on his chest, the kind that comes from a feeling you cannot name yet, but your body already recognizes as a warning. Outside, the faint sound of the river drifting past his hotel blended with distant horns and early market chatter. The city was waking up, but Daniel felt as if he had not slept at all. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the previous evening in his mind. Something about Nisha had unsettled him. The tension in her voice, the way she kept gripping her phone, the moment she stepped away to speak in hushed tones with someone he could not see. He tried to shake it off and focus on the good days they had shared, but the unease only deepened. He made himself a weak cup of instant coffee and stepped onto the balcony. The cool morning air hit his face, and for a moment he allowed himself to believe that everything would be normal again once he saw her. Yet part of him already understood that what came next would be different. This was the morning when everything began to unravel. He met Nisha near the pier as they had planned. She arrived with a smile, but it was thinner, strained. Her eyes darted around as if searching for something or someone. Daniel tried to start a light conversation, but she seemed distracted. When he asked if something was wrong, she brushed it off with a quick laugh. A laugh that sounded nothing like her usual warm, gentle tone. He felt the first real pull of fear, a quiet twist in his stomach that he tried to hide behind a smile. They spent the morning walking through a crowded market. Vendors called out in Thai, offering fruit, hand-carved decorations, spices with strong scents that drifted through the air. But Nisha seemed uninterested. She glanced at her phone often, her fingers tapping nervously against her thigh. Every few minutes it buzzed with a message, and each time she read one, her face tightened just slightly before she forced a smile back onto it. Daniel finally asked again if she was sure everything was all right. She hesitated, then said she had been helping her brother with something, and he kept asking questions. It was not convincing, but Daniel wanted to believe it. He wanted the feeling of safety he had felt around her in the first days of their bond. He convinced himself once more that he was imagining things, that his training in risk analysis sometimes poisoned his ability to relax. But in the early afternoon, Nisha suggested they go somewhere quieter. She led him through narrow alleys that twisted behind the market, away from the noise and crowds. The air became still, heavy. Daniel felt the shift immediately. Something was off. Nisha kept glancing behind them. Her steps were uneven. When he reached out to touch her arm and asked what was going on, she whispered that she needed to talk but could not do it in a busy place. They finally stopped in a small courtyard behind an abandoned building. The walls were chipped, the ground cracked. It felt disconnected from the rest of the city. Nisha stood with her back partly turned to him, breathing deeper than usual. When she finally spoke, her voice shook. She told him that she had made mistakes in the past, debts she could not escape, people she owed money to. She said they were pressuring her again, asking for more because they believed she was now spending time with a foreigner who had money. Daniel froze. He felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. All the small red flags he had ignored rushed back with painful clarity. He asked her how much she owed. She did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, she said an amount that made Daniel's stomach drop. It was far too large for a simple debt, far too large for the life she had described. When he asked how she had gotten into such trouble, her eyes filled with tears. She said it had been a mix of helping family and trusting the wrong people. Daniel wanted to believe her. He wanted to protect her. Seeing her cry triggered something in him that overrode caution. He stepped closer, reached out and tried to comfort her. Before he could say anything more, her phone buzzed again. She looked at it and paled. Then she grabbed Daniel's hands and begged him not to leave her. She said they would hurt her if she could not pay soon. She said she was afraid. Her tears fell quickly now, and Daniel felt his heart squeeze. But the other part of him, the logical part, screamed that something was wrong. The story did not fit. None of it aligned with the timeline of their meetings or the small inconsistencies he had noticed. But emotions have a way of drowning instincts. Daniel told her they could figure it out, that he would help her talk to someone or find a safer solution. But she shook her head violently. She said they would not negotiate. She said they wanted the money today. He asked her to let him speak with someone to confirm the situation, but she refused. Her fear seemed real. Her trembling felt real. And in that moment he could not bring himself to challenge her further. They left the courtyard and walked toward an ATM, her grip on his hand tight. Daniel felt the pulse of anxiety in his neck as he withdrew a large amount of money. He handed it to her, hoping he was doing the right thing. She thanked him repeatedly, hugging him tightly, promising she would fix everything and that things would soon return to normal. But they did not. 3 hours later, she disappeared. Daniel waited at the place she had said she would meet him. He checked his phone constantly. He called her multiple times. No answer. He tried to stay calm, telling himself she would return once she handled the issue. But as the sun dipped below the buildings and the city lights flickered back to life, the truth began to settle like a heavy stone in his stomach. He had been played. The messages he sent through the evening grew shorter, more tense. He asked if she was safe. No reply. He asked her to just let him know she was all right. Silence. At midnight, he checked her social media. Her profile was suddenly gone. Vanished. He tried calling again, but it rang once, then went straight to voicemail. His heart was pounding now. Not with anger yet, but with confusion mixed with dread. The next morning, he went to the cafe where they first met. The owner recognized him, but said Nisha had not been in for 2 days. He went to the shop she worked at. The woman behind the counter told him that Nisha had quit a week ago. Daniel felt the world spin. Nothing made sense anymore. The pieces of the puzzle were falling apart in his hands, revealing a picture he did not want to face. He spent the entire day searching for her, walking through markets, asking people who might know her, revisiting the places they had been to together. But nobody knew her. Nobody seemed to have seen her recently. Every person he asked only deepened the realization that he had been drifting blindly into a trap crafted carefully around his vulnerability. By late evening, Daniel made a decision that he would regret even more later. He returned to his hotel, opened his banking app, and sent another message offering additional help if she would just tell him where she was or if she needed to escape the people she had mentioned. He told himself it was compassion, that maybe the first amount had not been enough. But deep down, another part of him knew exactly what he was doing. He was clinging to the hope that the story might still be real, that she might still care for him, even a little. The message was read within seconds. Then came a short reply. 4 words. Cold, detached. I will contact you. It was the moment Daniel finally felt the weight of betrayal settle into his bones. He stared at the screen, reading the words again and again. The warmth that had filled him during their early days was gone. In its place, something hollowed out his chest, leaving behind a painful mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. He barely slept. When morning came, he checked his messages and found nothing. He waited through the day, paralyzed between hope and fear. Hours passed in silence. By evening, he knew the truth. He had been manipulated, played with expert precision by someone who understood how to pull every emotional string inside him. But the worst part was still ahead, because the damage was not just financial. It was emotional, psychological. It was a deep cut into the place he had thought was safe inside himself. This was the fall, the painful collapse of trust that left him facing a reality he did not want to accept. The moment he finally understood that the woman he had grown attached to had never truly been who she appeared to be. She had been a mask, a story, a beautifully crafted lie. Daniel sat in the dim light of his hotel room, the cool hum of the air conditioner doing nothing to quiet the noise in his mind. The city outside continued as if nothing had changed. Boats still moved along the river, motorbikes still weaved between cars, street vendors still called out to passing crowds. Bangkok carried on with its chaotic rhythm, but Daniel felt as if he had been dropped into a silent world, disconnected from everything around him. He stared at the last message she sent, 4 simple words that felt like a blade pressed against the part of him he had trusted most. He kept reading them, hoping they would change, hoping something in them would reveal a hint of the woman he thought he knew. But the words stayed cold, detached, empty. As the night stretched on, Daniel began replaying their entire time together. Every smile, every shared story, every moment that had felt warm. But now, when he looked back, he saw the fractures he had ignored, the inconsistencies, the moments when her eyes had drifted away just slightly too long, the times she had tensed when certain people walked by, the quiet hesitation that sometimes appeared before she spoke. He felt foolish, not because he had cared, but because he had wanted the connection so badly that he had blinded himself to the truth. He had travelled halfway across the world to escape routine, only to fall into a trap disguised as affection. The realization hurt far more than the money he had lost. The next morning, he went to the police station. He walked through heavy wooden doors into a room that smelled of ink, paper, and old coffee. An officer listened politely as Daniel explained what had happened. The man's face remained still, almost bored, as if he had heard the same story countless times before. When Daniel finished, the officer sighed quietly and told him the truth in a gentle but direct tone. This happens often. Some people create relationships with tourists for money. They build trust slowly and then disappear. It is difficult to trace them. They use multiple names, different addresses, and sometimes even switch jobs frequently. The officer explained that unless there had been threats or physical harm, cases like this rarely led to arrests. Daniel felt a heavy truth settle over him. There was nothing to do now but accept that she was gone. He walked out of the station into the blinding sunlight, feeling hollow. The city that had once felt vibrant and alive now felt unfamiliar, almost hostile. Every face in the crowd reminded him of how easily he had been fooled. Every street corner looked like a place where she might have pretended to care. He felt anger rising at times, then sadness, then confusion, then silence again. He spent his final days in Thailand wandering without direction. He visited the places they had shared, but each one felt heavier now. The rooftop bar where they had watched the city lights, the temple they had visited barefoot, whispering in the quiet halls, the tiny cafe where she had first asked for a seat next to him. Each location carried a lingering echo of something that had felt genuine at the time, but was now twisted into a reminder of betrayal. One evening, while sitting at the river's edge, Daniel thought about calling her one last time. He imagined her phone lighting up. He imagined her seeing his name. He imagined her hesitating. But he knew deep down that she would not answer. And even if she did, he did not trust himself to hear her voice again without breaking somewhere inside. As his flight home approached, he packed his suitcase slowly. Every item he folded brought back a memory. The shirt, she said, looked good on him. The small souvenir she helped him bargain for. The map she had marked with places she wanted to show him. He held the map for a long moment before placing it inside the trash bin. Letting go felt painful, but necessary. On the flight back to London, Daniel sat by the window, staring at clouds illuminated by the rising sun. He finally allowed himself to reflect on the deeper truth. This experience had exposed a vulnerability he had buried for years. He had not fallen for Nisha simply because of her charm. He had fallen because he had been lonely, tired, and emotionally starved without realizing it. She had stepped into a space he never admitted existed, and she had used that space to pull him in. By the time the plane landed, Daniel felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. He would never forget what happened. The memory would follow him like a shadow, but he would not allow it to define him entirely. There was a lesson buried inside the pain, and he intended to find it. In the weeks that followed, Daniel struggled. Nights were restless, days were slow. He avoided conversations about the trip, giving vague answers when colleagues asked how it had been. He told no one the truth, not because he was ashamed of losing money, but because admitting the emotional part felt too raw, too personal. But slowly, he started rebuilding himself. He took long walks, he read more, he talked to an old friend he had ignored for years. He even joined a small travel group for people who wanted to share experiences honestly, without hiding the difficult parts. One night, months later, he finally shared his story out loud for the first time. And to his surprise, others shared similar experiences. Stories of trust misplaced, stories of people who hid behind charm and warmth, stories of lessons learned through pain. It did not erase what had happened, but it helped Daniel breathe again. Now, when he looks back at his time in Thailand, the memory is still painful, but not overwhelming. He no longer sees Nisha's face every time he closes his eyes. He no longer wonders if she ever truly cared. He knows the answer. She cared only enough to get what she wanted, nothing more. Yet Daniel also knows that he is stronger now, more aware, more cautious, but not closed off. He refuses to let the actions of one person turn him into someone who fears connection forever. He trusted her, and he paid the price. But the deepest truth he learned is that even after falling, even after breaking, he can stand again. Her shadow remains behind him, but his life continues forward.